So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Stephen Jordan.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Normally I do a lot of performance pieces. I decided to change things up a bit today and relax and sit down and be calm and cool and collected today. I'm going to read you right now the introduction to Cold, Black, and Hungry, my second book. I was born cold, black, and hungry. As Aquarius destroyed Capricorn, taking over winter. At the same moment, Jimmy Carter was inaugurated, pushing materialism even further into the forefront of our worldview with his false promises to lower prices of goods. Some would see no correlation between the two events, but there is. Some say that as an Aquarian, I'm friendly and a humanitarian, honest and loyal, original and inventive, independent and intellectual. Others would say I'm intractable and contrary, perverse, unpredictable, unemotional, and detached. All of these are true. And just as I had no control over being born, I had no control over the fact that I was born with these characteristics and to a line of, let's say, child molesters, murderers in this world, addicts, that I'd never know. At this time, America couldn't imagine that its people and the generations to come would be damaged goods. President Carter's perfidy merely brought to ripeness the seeds of wretchedness planted years before, and that fruit has been rotting on the vine ever since. But I'm hardly a politician, and I don't claim to know anything about politics. I merely know of mankind's hidden agendas and his unwillingness to accept and to change. Being cold, black, and hungry is something innate for me. I never even knew to consider being anything different. And with age, each characteristic becomes even more prominent than it had been before. And it became especially noticeable when I released Beyond Bougie, my first book, and had to spend time constantly on my toes defending my thoughts from those who share my same bloodline, but barely know me. Let alone the concept of having a global metaphor in creative nonfiction. After all, just because you are family doesn't necessarily mean you are family, if you get my drift. I believe I knew I was cold and hungry before I knew I was black. My coldness derives from those who have placed negativity on me and even placed me into an outsidership. Simply because we cannot be shelved categorically inside given perimeters or social norms doesn't necessarily mean we need to be an outsider. But I have been. Too often we get trapped into believing the $1 words of others telling us that we cannot be what we were placed on this earth to be. Too often we're molded by family and supposed friends to attempt to fulfill a part of their lives that they'll never achieve. Too often the start of our demise is with an individual in whom we place the most trust, a best friend or a family member. And once that trust is broken, the unspoken contract is broken, we become cold, frigid, and heartless toward them and perhaps the world at large. Never again will things be the same. But when it comes to the brass tacks of it all, we cause our own demise for believing and accepting such hollow words from others. After all, the only one who has my back is me. And the only one who can probably pull you out of a rut is you. More often than not, we can't honestly blame others for our own situations. Once, when we were young, my sister and I had to stay with relatives for a few weeks. It was January, my birthday. I was to receive a miniature Space Invaders arcade game, and it was placed inside of a Deskin's grocery store bag on top of the china cabinet. And my dad was working what seemed to be endless hours while Mom was undergoing some sort of surgery. I remember several things. I remember I was not allowed to leave the dinner table until I ate all the fat off the chicken. I remember not eating. I remember that I didn't share my Space Invaders game with my other relatives. I remember that it was taken away from me because I would not share it with my other relatives. And I was not allowed to play with it until my dad came to pick us up and take us home. Finally, I remember laying underneath the bed, cold, black with soot, and hungry, dialing 911 for Stephen Clinic Hospital, telling the operator where my mom was and that I was hungry. But no one remembers things like that. We have a tendency to not remember things that we don't want to remember. We're funny like that. Life is disturbing like that. I just don't make things up. I live through them. Sadly, no one wants to dwell on the bad times of our lives and the struggles. Even if the drama belonged to someone else, we tend to not want to remember, to shove it away in the dark corners of our memory we never look into. But to heal and to progress, we must go against our natural inclination and remember those bad times and discuss them openly. Otherwise, there will be no progression in life, and we'll be trapped in our own hateful stereotypes and psychoses. I've witnessed the hidden agendas of man and how he holds his own people back. I've seen how we hold our own people back because we are not true to who we are. Think of the watermelon man, a Eurocentric stereotyped image which has brought shame and anger to the black community. Why has something so unreal become so real to us? Are we as black folk ashamed of our past, of these iconic images? Are we afraid to understand and accept the fact that our people do come in various shades of blacks and browns? And importantly, if we are that black as the watermelon man, does that mean we're any less of a man? Studying such fervently reviled images of the watermelon man forces us to think, forces us to peer outside our social norms, and forces us to realize that even with our Armani suits, we're still fundamentally the same person with a damaged history. As the cliche goes, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. And the same thing can be said about the watermelon man. You can take the watermelon man off the plantation, but with his firm grip, can you really take the watermelon from his hand? It's difficult to deny something that is part of your history and your culture, and in the end, denial causes more harm than good. My personal mission with writing Cold, Black, and Hungry was to bring forth our damaged goods, our souls. Race, class, and gender aside, we're all healing human beings who tend to live naively inside our stained glass windows, hoping that everything will be okay, and that the people with whom we choose to associate are genuinely kind. That the man who is homeless on the street is truly homeless and won't spend your pocket change on liquor. That the mother who cries for her deceased daughter is not the murderer. That a woman is not suppressed in her marriage. That families and people of the same ethnicities are emotionally linked, and so forth. We can hope for all this, but hope doesn't necessarily equate the truth. To learn the truth, we must be hungry to gain knowledge, to progress in life. Ultimately, this comes down to accepting ourselves and being held accountable for the actions that will create our futures and the future of our children. Now, just because something is expected doesn't mean it will be so. Just because it is expected that I, as an Aquarian, will have many characteristics doesn't necessarily justify my actions. Just because my people were enslaved generations ago doesn't necessarily justify hatred for other races. We control everything if we are willing to open ourselves and experience our differences.